opening into the same environment which we left. And when we get underway, our first presentation from Kathy McGillie will focus on the health and safety considerations of returning to the workplace. Then we're going to have Tina McKenzie of Grafton Recruitment, who will look at how businesses have responded and worked through the pandemic. And then finally, we have a great case study from Ciaran Doherty of Huhtamaki, focusing on how they've teamed up with Block Blinds, partnered, and then pivoted their businesses into making PPE for the NHS. So I think now we'll get underway with Kathy, and I'll call her to unmute her mic, show us her video, and we can start talking.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. As consideration of the easing of lockdown measures continues, employers will have to place health and safety at the forefront of their business thinking. And of course, this is not new, but a recovery in post-lockdown environment does require employers to review their working environments and their practices and procedures, with mitigation of the spread of coronavirus a crucial consideration alongside the normal risks associated with their business activities. I want to touch on the existing legal framework and look at some of the things that employers will need to consider within that framework in order to make the move back to productivity and hopefully to profitability following lockdown as seamless as possible. And key to this will be encouraging people and employees back into the workplace. A major issue for employers across all sectors and business environments will be to try and manage their employees' concerns for their personal health and safety, and by extension, those employees may be anxious also about infection control within the workplace and possibly bringing the risk of infection back into their homes and to their families. We're already hearing about public transport concerns and the debate around using face coverings on public transport. And as you know, from the 15th of June, I believe, that is a mandatory requirement in England and Wales. Not so here, although the debate continues. I believe the executive are going to be continuing to look at that in the course of this week. But the Public Health Agency and the Health and Safety Executive here in Northern Ireland have issued guidance on the use of face coverings, for example, in public transport, and have recommended in certain circumstances that it be used. So that would be, for example, in enclosed spaces for short periods where social distancing is not possible. So this may be particularly impactful, the public transport issue in getting into work may be particularly impactful for town and city centre locations. So that would affect, I suppose, retail, hospitality and services sectors, office environments, and not so much so for those out of town locations where employees are more reliant on private transport. So we'd say that communication and engagement is key to understanding workforce concerns. And I know coming back off lockdown and back into the workplace, some employers are considering the use of workers' questionnaires. And that's one way in which this sort of level of engagement might be achieved. Other employers which have union involvement in their businesses can liaise with employee reps or union reps for that purpose. And it's not a nice to do or a nice to have, it's actually a requirement for employers to consult with their employees in relation to matters involving their health and safety. And that's under what's called the Health and Safety at Work Consultation with Employees regulations. So in order to get back to a functioning workplace and to minimise disruption, employers are now perhaps more than ever going to need to promote their health and safety culture and their values, and they must clearly articulate and repeat and document the health and safety messages in the post-lockdown environment. So I mentioned at the outset that I wanted to touch on the legal framework, and as many of you will know, that is the based on the Health and Safety at Work Northern Ireland Order 1978, and then various regulations, many regulations flowing from that. But if you could just articulate the general duty in that legislation is for employers to ensure, as far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety of all of its employees. And there's also legislation then, or content within that legislation to articulate that same duty to non-employees. So, for example, visitors to the workplace environment or third-party contractors who are coming on to site to carry out some work. But I think it's worth saying and noting that particularly in the current climate, it's not just one-way traffic. And whilst the health and safety at work regulations are very onerous for employers, there is a corresponding duty for employees here as well. And that is for an employee to take reasonable care of his own health and safety and the health and safety of any other person who may be affected by his or her acts. And importantly, they must also cooperate with their employer as far as is necessary to enable the employer to comply with its statutory obligations. So arguably this would include cooperating with the employer to take steps to mitigate against infection and to adhere to the control measures that are put in place by the employer. So I don't want to go into reading out legislation to you, but if I could paraphrase some of the employer duties contained within that statutory framework. It includes the provision of an employer of systems of work that are, so far as is reasonably practicable, safe and without risk to the employee's health. The employer must put arrangements in place in relation to the safe use, handling, storage and articles and substances. The employer must also provide information, training and supervision to the employees and provide them with a safe place of work. And that includes making sure that access and egress to the workplace is safe and without risk. And that's important in the post-COVID environment. And they need to provide and maintain a safe working environment and adequate facilities and arrangements for the welfare of the employee whilst at work. So in light of the statutory obligations, what measures should be taken then by employers planning a return to work for employees or a scaling up of operations following lockdown? In the time allotted today, it's not going to be possible to go through each and every area that an employer may need to address within its own particular working environment. But certainly, employers need to proactively engage with employees to assess risks and to weigh those risks up and balance them against the probable effectiveness of any precautions they may take. Risk assessments are key and they must be kept under constant review because this is a dynamic risk environment. Employers then must make sure that all steps identified in their risk assessment are taken and that they're documented, and they must make their employees aware of the risks and provide them with updates and reminders on an ongoing basis. The guidance here, as you know, is constantly evolving, so dynamic risk assessments should be conducted, taking into account any new guidance or any new regulations, then communicating those changes to employees, training them in new risks and how you're going to control those risks, and to supervise them to make sure that the control measures are effective. I would say, and maybe a typical lawyer, I would say this, document all of this as well. So as I said, each business is different, but as a minimum, all government guidelines should be followed. And I think that the following key considerations should be provided for really across most, if not all businesses. Social distancing, there's been a lot of discussion around that, and that continues at the moment with a discussion both nationally and locally here in relation to the actual distance. It's currently 2 meters, but the discussion is around whether or not to open up the economy, and if it's safe, that could possibly be reduced to 1 meter, and that remains to be seen. It's a work in progress. But certainly social distancing measures being 2 meters currently, where those aren't possible, then the employer needs to think about enhanced protection measures, whether that's partitions, whether it's additional PPE. Certainly we've all got very used to the visual aids and markers within, for example, shops. Those are very common now, but we will see this as offices return and as hospitality returns as well. Hygiene, another crucial feature, not just personal hygiene, but also hygiene generally within the work environment. A lot of employers at this point in the hope that they're going to be getting people back to work sooner rather than later will be carrying out deep cleans of their premises. And I would say, again, document those deep cleaning regimes and ongoing cleaning regimes. For personal hygiene then, hand washing facilities must be provided with sufficient soap and hot water to comply with government guidelines in relation to washing hands. Sanitisers must also be provided, and there must be sufficient washing stations so as not to overcrowd the area, being mindful of social distancing rules. Some employers I know are considering providing location maps for wash facilities and sanitising equipment as well. Employers also may wish to consider staggered working hours to avoid the congestion, for example, at entrances to work, in common parts, in canteen facilities and restrooms and wash areas, as I've mentioned before. And this goes back to that existing duty that we talked about previously concerning safe access and egress from the workplace. Employers need also to provide up-to-date guidance and information to their employees concerning symptoms and the requirement to report symptoms and inform the employer of any contact with others, for example, family members who have exhibited symptoms. And I would say this goes back to the employee obligation that I mentioned earlier on in terms of making sure he or she takes sufficient steps to look after his own personal safety, but also that of others. Also to assist and cooperate with the employer in relation to the employer's attempts and efforts to minimise risk. Employers can and may be considering isolation rooms, so that if an employee reports any symptoms whilst he or she is in work, that she can be directed or he can be directed away from the general employee population straight away. As part of a general risk assessment, employers may wish to consider them reducing or preventing access to non-essential non-employees. But if it's essential for a visitor to attend the premises, the employer has a duty to make sure that that visitor is aware of the protective measures that are in place within the business, and also ensure that they're adequately protected whilst on site, bearing in mind the obligations, again, we discussed and touched on the earlier part of the talk. Likewise, employers should consider whether or not it's essential for your employees to travel outside your normal place, their normal place of work. If it is, then that needs also to be risk assessed, because the employer will need to ensure that appropriate measures are in place to control the risk to their employees whilst outside the normal working environment. So I've mentioned before throughout the talk of the importance, in my opinion, to document all of the steps that have been taken. So the risk assessments that have been carried out on a dynamic basis, any variations to them, signage containing information or directions and instructions to employees. They must also be updated and reflect any changes, variations on that. And training documents or supervision documents as well, concerning possible new processes to take account of the mitigation factors for COVID. And I would suggest that it would be a useful document to have employees sign off in relation to the training that is provided, indicating that they understand the employer's requirements going forward. And this document trail from a lawyer's point of view is always crucial, but is even more so now when employers are operating within a very dynamic risk environment. Just as one of my final points really is just in terms of the reporting requirements to HSE&I. Everyone's aware of their right or obligations to report accidents in the workplace. And this information is all contained within the Health and Safety Executive's website. But in brief, they have confirmed that reporting obligation relating to any COVID-19 scenarios will arise where it relates to work-related exposure. So there must be reasonable evidence that someone diagnosed with COVID was likely to have been exposed because of their work, and the person making the report has received a doctor's written statement confirming the diagnosis of the disease, and the work of the person with the disease involves working with microorganisms or work with live or dead human beings in the course of providing treatment or service, or the conduct of any investigation involving exposure to blood or bodily fluids, or that they work with animals and potentially infected material. I would just like to conclude by saying that there is a lot of guidance available from various sources, most importantly the government official guidance, but also the Health and Safety Executive have produced and continue to produce material and publish that on their website, labour relations agencies and various industry bodies. But it's crucially important, I'd like to just finish with this, to, as an absolute minimum, advise or follow government advice and protocols. So that's really where I'd like to finish, John.
Kathy, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, an awful lot for people to think about there. I know I've made a brief foray into Broadcasting House in Belfast very recently, where we all now have to have our temperatures taken at reception. And then if we are too hot, we have to go and sit in an isolation area and then come back and have them taken again 2 minutes later. And if we don't pass the test, then that is us. We are not allowed into the building. And we also now have a one-way system where you have to exit through the back gate onto Lennon Hall Street. So I've seen massive changes in my workplace, although I've not been in it very much recently. And if there aren't any questions about it this at the end, something that I will want to come back to is the legal position between what it actually says in the regulations and then what it actually says in the guidance, and how people are supposed to interpret that and what exactly they are supposed to do. Enough from me now. If I'll now call on Tina McKenzie from Grafton Recruitment for our next presentation. Tina, thank you very much.
Hi, John. Can you hear me and can you see me?
I can hear you. Yes, I can see you as well. So yes, you're good to go.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good morning, nearly afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Kathy. Thanks, John. I'm just going to take us through a little bit of, I guess, a bit of what's happened and how that's affected the business community here in Northern Ireland. So I'm going to recap of where we are now and how we got here. I think it was the former Soviet leader, Vladimir Lenin. He is thought to have said that there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. And this can certainly be true of the last few weeks and months for us. So let's just go back and have a recap. Can you change the slide, please, Chelsea? Thank you. So the 31st of January was when we saw the first 2 cases of coronavirus in the UK. That's when the first 2 were confirmed. 25th of Feb, then, is when the government guidance came out to state that travellers returning from Hubei, Iran, and certain regions of South Korea should self-isolate on reaching home or their destination, even if they have no symptoms. 27th of Feb is when authorities confirmed Northern Ireland's first case. And the 5th of March is when the first death from coronavirus in the UK was confirmed. Seems like a very long time ago. England's Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, told the MPs in the UK that the UK had moved to the second stage of dealing with COVID-19 from containment to delay phase. On the 20th of March, the Prime Minister ordered all cafes, pubs, restaurants to close from that evening of the 20th of March, except for takeaway food to tackle coronavirus. All the UK's nightclubs, theatres, cinemas, gyms, leisure centres are told to close as soon as they reasonably can. On the 23rd of March, then, Johnson announces a UK-wide partial lockdown to contain the spread of the virus, so not a long period of time for business. The public were instructed that they must stay at home except for certain very limited purposes, shopping for basic necessities, 1 form of exercise per day, or any medical need, and to travel to and from work when absolutely necessary. The 20th of March was when the regulations were laid before the Northern Ireland Assembly, and they were passed in 1 day. It's amazing what can happen when the pressure's on. These regulations place significant restrictions on many businesses, the ability to trade, and place conditions on the movement and gathering of people. Next slide, please. So the regulations effectively created 3 tiers of businesses. Firstly, the essential public-facing businesses, mostly food and beverage retail, but also bike shops, hardware stores, pharmacies, who were permitted to trade throughout and were encouraged actually to stay open, though ensuring social distancing was in place. Secondly, non-essential public-facing businesses, which were ordered to close, including clothes shops, bars, restaurants, cafes. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the third tier, we had businesses which aren't public facing, and these businesses were faced with a dilemma. For those professional services such as IT, accountants, consultancy, they had the ability to adjust to work from home. And my own business, Grafton Recruitment, we were able to ensure about 80% of our staff could move very quickly, set up with laptops and start working from home within a few days. And of course, it proved to be a huge increase in video conferencing. I think we all know now about Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. So the crisis has shown us as employers, working from home can be effective. It's definitely proved to me, I wouldn't have believed we could be so effective and so productive actually working from home. And I think that's something that's going to continue. And it's something that more businesses will readily deploy in the future. For non-public facing businesses which relied on workers being on site, such as manufacturing and construction, there was definitely confusion. And it's fair to say that it was and still is a topic of considerable political discussion, especially in the early days of the lockdown. Next slide, please. So in the space, a group called the Engagement Forum was established by the executive. And this was a group of people from very diverse backgrounds coming together to help us get through this. And all too often in Northern Ireland, we hear about the divisions, but this is people volunteering, giving up their time to help our businesses, help our workers and our employees get through this. It's chaired by the Labour Relations Agency, and it's collaboration between the business community, public health officials, trade unions, the local councils, just a huge group of people that wouldn't normally come together. The group produced this working through this together, which is a really good document which gives you advice on how to work safely in your business, and it covers all sectors. And the good thing about this guide is it's a small booklet. I think it's 8 or 9 pages with some great links at the back of it, sector specific as well. So if you're out there and you're looking for just a one easy guide, I know the stuff that Kathy was talking about is really important, and you can find most of it in this guide in terms of how to get back to work safely as well. And you'll find it on the NI Business website. Next slide, please. So as I outlined earlier, what sector you're in has been a real determinant on whether you were able to trade through the crisis. And small businesses who sell clothes, books and other things which were considered non-essential have been frustrated that larger supermarkets have been allowed to trade selling those items, whilst their shutters have remained closed and whilst they probably don't have access to the same reserves. It's great to see, and we've lobbied hard at the FSB and other organisations have as well. It's great to see that those businesses get to open their doors tomorrow. And I'll remind you that in Northern Ireland, 99% of companies are small businesses, and more people are employed by small business than the whole of the public sector and big business put together. 75% of private sector turnover is small business in Northern Ireland. So it's important that these businesses get back up and running again. So our small businesses have been really innovative in terms of how businesses have adjusted. Restaurants have pivoted to offer their takeaways, and we're seeing it all over Twitter, everybody getting their fancy dinners of a weekend, cooking home services, and we're even seeing people going out and delivering a pint of Guinness at your door, which is great. And many other small businesses in a more serious way have repurposed providing practical solutions to join the fight against COVID, moving from distilling gin to hand sanitizers, and many have been producing the required PPE. I know we're going to hear more about Block Blinds, an FSB member, and the partnership with Huhtamaki, so I won't steal Ciaran's thunder. It's fantastic work there. You can also see in this picture on the right-hand side, Environmental Street Furniture standalone hand sanitizer. Well, they're a good Northern Ireland company that provide street furniture to places like Disneyland, all over the world, and they came out and produced this hand sanitizer. Another good Northern Irish business, OB Solutions, developed by Gareth Macklin, have designed software to enable businesses to get the workforce back together. So lots of small businesses are continuing to innovate. And I'm sure you'll see more innovation as more businesses reopen and we find a way to live with the risk of the virus for some time to come. So the new norm, next slide please, Chelsea. What does the new norm look like? It's been talked about so much and it's kind of become cliched. However, when vast swathes of retail open tomorrow, it won't be life as we knew it before, and social distancing and longer queues are going to be the order of the day. Before coronavirus, we were already discussing the high street being in crisis, the competition with online retail, and people seeking experiences rather than things in terms of their shopping habits. Challenges around COVID have amplified this discussion further, and we don't know to what extent people will be comfortable actually coming back into town and into city centres, although this is going to be revealed obviously in the days to come. We also need to think holistically about the economy and how sectors benefit from each other within the ecosystem. With professional services companies unlikely to return to full office capacity, what does that mean for the local cafe on the street, the sandwich shop, or the small retail who are normally relying on that footfall? So further policy and future policy should be mindful that it may be some time before those small businesses can manage to make it through the crisis or even able to be on an even keel again. Next slide, please, Chelsea. Last slide too. So whilst coronavirus has caused significant harm with many, many deaths and considerable economic damage, it may also be an opportunity to reflect on our lives and also how society has been organised to date. The person pictured is Rahm Emanuel. He was President Obama's Chief of Staff, Principal Advisor during the first year of his presidency. He was later the Mayor of Chicago. And this quote has become somewhat famous. "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." And what I mean by that, he said, is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. He envisaged that the 2008-2009 economic crisis as an opportunity to create change, which meant for him reshaping the US economy. The essence of this quote has been used throughout history, of course, and indeed originally goes back to McGillie in the 16th century. So if we think what has been achieved after the carnage of the Second World War, we have the creation of the NHS, the welfare state, universal education. The real question is, as we emerge from the coronavirus, we can already see some aspects of our society reorganising, more active travel, greater awareness of the outside world, communities that have rallied around each other, ensuring that the vulnerable were looked after, people saying hello to you in your street that just didn't happen before. We've learned lessons in the terms of the value of health and social care, which may have policy implications going forward. Similarly, we should not lose sight of those local small businesses who have adapted, responded, and ensured that our needs were met throughout lockdown, and their importance should not be forgotten as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tina. And I think that point about suddenly able to do things which in the past seemed impossible is a big one. You know, you've clearly in your business you found that, but I think also in the BBC we found it as well. We had all these tools which were just sort of lying around and not really being used, but in extremis we were able to kind of make it work. And I think in professional services in particular, they have found they've been able to make all those work from home tools function properly. So it is going to be fascinating to see how much of that is going to be sustained in the coming months and years. Move on to our final speaker now, Ciaran from Huhtamaki. This is a great story because if you remember early on in this crisis, there was this huge panic around PPE. That it was clear that the UK, right across the UK, were short on PPE. And we saw some local businesses pivoting into making those vital products. And one of them is Ciaran's businesses, Huhtamaki. So he'll take us through that journey and what they've been doing. Ciaran, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ciaran Doherty, and I am the UK General Manager for our business, so I look after the UK region. So probably just start, most of you, I guess, probably haven't heard of Huhtamaki. It's not a product that you can you see in your shelves in the supermarket. So let me just introduce who we are first before I tell you the story of how we started to make PPE. Chelsea, do you want to just move to the next slide? So we're a global food and drink packaging business. We are from Helsinki. We're a Finnish company, so Huhtamaki is the surname of our founder. We were founded we're celebrating our 100th anniversary this year, and we're operating out of 81 manufacturing units across 35 countries. So we are a truly global company with a really global footprint. And last year we turned over 3.4 billion euros. So we are truly a big company. But more importantly, just to sort of, we can hone in, Chelsea, into the next slide, which gives you a wee bit more of an insight into who we are here in the UK and Ireland, and the part of the business which I'm responsible for. So we're spread across those 6 sites that you can see there. So in Blackburn, we're making fluted corrugated food packaging. In Belfast, we are making folded carton products. So our big customers out of Belfast would be McDonald's, which is about 45% of our business in Belfast, where we make fry cartons, we make burger boxes, we make lots of their packaging, virtually all of their range. And all the big customers in Belfast there would include Kellogg's cereal boxes. So, I mean, we're one of those businesses that, although you haven't heard of, most of us be using and consuming our packaging every day of the week. In Ennis, southwest of Ireland, there we have a plant which is effectively, if you think about Moonpig for coffee cups. So people can send us in images of a graphic, maybe for example a birthday party, and we can send you out small quantities of coffee cups. So it's quite an innovative startup business which we started there 2-3 years ago. We have plant in Lurgan, also here in Northern Ireland, where we're making egg cartons and cup carriers for restaurants. Gosport, we have 2 big factories under the Gosport site, where we're the UK's biggest manufacturer of coffee cups. So big customers of ours out of Gosport would be Starbucks, Costa, quite a lot big part of the coffee chains, Cafe Nero. So again, you'll be used to using our products from there. And then we really exciting success story over the course of 2019, when we opened a brand new factory in Antrim here to make sustainable paper straws. And we launched that with McDonald's, who were the first of the big quick service restaurants to come out of plastic straws, and they launched with us as their supply partner. We now are supplying paper straws out of Antrim all across Europe, and indeed we've actually a customer in New Zealand where we're shipping directly from Antrim for. So it's been a real success story since that factory has started up. Just drop onto the next slide there for me, Chelsea, thanks. So just a quick overview then, you can see of all the product range that we're making here in the UK and Ireland, of mostly sustainable products. 95% of our products that we're selling out to customers now is fully sustainable, and that we're accelerating into that category, but mostly into food service and food and drinks. So again, haven't heard of Huhtamaki, but I mean that you're using our products regularly. So that's really the story, introduction of who we are, and as you can imagine, a lot of those big customers, which I deliberately name dropped there, like McDonald's, Starbucks, Costa, Burger King, KFC, whenever the global pandemic kicked in, right at the end of March, all of those big stores and chains closed really within the space of 48 hours. McDonald's, and I remember sitting at home and reading the announcement from McDonald's that McDonald's were closing all of their restaurants right across the UK and Ireland, which was stunning news for us. And within the space of 24 hours, sure enough, virtually all of our customers closed, and so we had a very, very difficult week, like many, I'm sure, on the call towards the end of March, where we had to furlough across the UK something like 1,250 or 1,300 of our workforce were immediately put into furlough as we tried to protect the cash flow in our business and try to protect as many of those jobs as we possibly could. So that was difficult and challenging times. We did have some semblance of operations at that time in those early couple of weeks, where some of our retail customers like Kellogg's were continuing to trade well, but it was pretty crushing news for us, to be honest. At that time, towards the very end of March, I became aware of a local company. I'm a Maherfeld man. I know there's some Maherfeld fellow people on the call there. I became aware of Block Blinds and Cormac Diamond, a guy who I went to school with, and a lot of buzz around the town here about what Block were doing, creating face shields. I mean, Block Blinds, as the name, if you haven't heard of Block Blinds, they make window blinds, very innovative and highly successful business in their own right. But like a lot of us, they too were impacted. People, sure enough, were buying less blinds. So they, in a really innovative fashion, started to make face shields out of PPE, out of PET. And they were doing it really just using their own skills, the craft skills. So literally fabric cutting, gluing, sticking, stapling, hand packing into boxes. And they really threw people at it, and they really got into it in a really good way. And had a really early success right at the within 2 weeks, had secured an order through HSC-NI to supply for the NHS in Northern Ireland. So I became aware of that and a lot of buzz around the town, and Cormac and I got in touch and had a conversation, and I just sort of wanted to feel out exactly what the specifications for the product were, understand exactly what the material he was using was, and what the potential for the product was. So within the space of what started with a casual conversation, very quickly became, his team and my team literally doing 20-hour days, and I mean doing 20-hour days, from here in my back room to his house, and his team, and we're all working on Microsoft Teams, designing, discussing, creating ideas. Very quickly on day 4 from the original conversation, Cormac and I had agreed a heads of terms partnership agreement. But whenever it became clear that we would be able to, with his help, redesign the product to turn it into something which was suitable for large-scale, high-speed manufacture, and that's the product that you can see on the screen there, worn by Jared, our health and safety manager there in Belfast. So not only did we, by redesigning the product, were we able to make it suitable for high-speed manufacture, we actually, between Cormac's team and our own team, we're able to make the product actually stand out from the competition, in that the product is actually, there's only 2 components with the parts, so there's no staples on there, there's no elastic straps, it is all one integral part, and immediately that really put it up the scale on the quality for the NHS, because they felt that lack of contaminants made the product stand out. We quickly then, between us, were able to secure all of the different certifications and accreditations that we needed to widely market the product. So initially we took, from the early days, for Cormac and his team, were in the first couple of weeks producing, incredible amounts for hand manufacture, like 40,000-50,000 units a week. By repurposing our site in Belfast, we were able to take that capacity up to where we are now at 4.5 million units a week. So we're producing for 40-odd thousand an hour. We are had initially agreed a large-scale contract for HSC-NI supplying NHS Northern Ireland, and then as recently as Thursday of last week, we have just, between the two of us, secured a very significant contract directly into NHS England, and we believe that we now, in our partnership, are the single biggest supplier of face shields into the entire NHS, and we are already now at this stage in detailed negotiations and discussions with the NHS to become long-term suppliers. So we have an incredible opportunity now between us with the 2 contracts that we now have secured between Northern Ireland and England. Our aim now is to not only have not a single, which we haven't had yet, not a single negative feedback on quality. We haven't missed a single day's delivery for on time and in full, and that is our ambition now over the coming 12 weeks to secure these contracts, to do that and put ourselves between us in pole position for a longer term contract, because we think that it's not just our own opinion. Speaking directly to the senior leaders within the NHS, they tell us that protocol for PPE now within healthcare has changed forever. This pandemic has changed how healthcare providers protect their staff, and so it's an incredible opportunity for us. We're taking it incredibly seriously, and we do not think that either of us that this is what started out as something just to try to keep our 2 businesses active during the down period. We now are repurposing our business for the longer term, and we feel that PPE will most definitely be a strong element of our product portfolios. So with that confidence of that new order now into NHS England, I have been actively over the last couple of weeks just to make sure that we have a surety of supply and we can scale up now across all of Europe. We now are already, what started in Belfast, we now are producing in Ennis, we're producing in Blackburn, and we're producing actually in 2 of our Polish plants as well, for something which has grown from that initial conversation with Cormac. And I am in regular discussions now with our senior executive leadership team now in Helsinki to how we can invest for the long term and how we can grow this out globally for something which started here in Northern Ireland. So that's something that, you know, me personally, but you know, more importantly, the whole of the Belfast team, and I know all of Cormac's team within Block Blinds are incredibly proud of. We genuinely think we've made a contribution to the fight and the protection of frontline healthcare workers. So yeah, if you want to just, Chelsea, move on to the next slide, just to sort of give you a sense of how quickly this is moving for us now. So because of now we are incredible to say. I mean, Tina's comment from, I can't remember who said that, for, you know, weeks become, you can achieve in weeks what maybe in other times you have would take decades to do. Lennon, thank you. It's so true. I mean, if we were to launch a single product like face shields under normal conditions, given all of the legal legislation and all of the different market and product development, that kind of project would take us, genuinely would take us months. But you know, we were able to create that from that initial conversation with Cormac to first deliveries. You know, was done in less than 2 weeks. At the same time now, you know, listening very carefully to, you know, Kathy mentioning about public transport systems. Not in London, for example, not allowed to get onto public transport without a face covering. Many of our global economies telling us that face covering are now either a recommendation or in some economies actually mandatory for general public. There's obviously a very, very distinct and right here, right now opportunities for face coverings, and the product that I'm just showing to you is Huhtamaki, which is a brand new product which we will launch to the public. So you're hearing it here first. We're launching it publicly on Monday. We are talking now directly to large-scale retailers right across Europe for our Huhtamaki product, which will be a high-quality, reusable face mask. And that is something which will be produced and packaged here in the UK. So, you know, just to finish up from my point of view, is that what did start off as an opportunity and a reaction and a protection of our business has most definitely become something which will become a core part of our business going forward.
Ciaran, thank you very much. An absolutely fascinating story. If you don't mind, I'll come in with a couple of questions first, just on that. In terms of, you know, getting the correct certifications and dealing with the health service, that must have been an entirely new bunch of people you're having to talk to. You know, how easy or difficult was it to kind of make that happen?
It was extremely difficult, but not just for us, John. I mean, this was something for the European Commission. It was a huge challenge for them. So the PPE product that we're talking about, their face shields, is governed by EU 2016-425. Now that is quite a complex and specialised piece of legislation which is designed for PPE. Clearly became a fact really quickly that the European, in fact, industry couldn't provide PPE quick enough. So what they had to do, the European Commission on the 17th of March had to reissue a relaxed legislation to enable large-scale manufacturers like ourselves to be able to comply, to be able to put these kind of products into large-scale manufacture. So at the time when we were developing that, the legislation was evolving itself, and trying to get interpretation and getting a legal opinion on this, and getting to speak to a legal advisor in this case was exceptionally complicated. So there was many late nights in this online McCormick trying ourselves to try to feel our way, with a lack of specialist knowledge in this, trying to feel our way through the legislation ourselves. So it was probably the single most challenging part of this, actually, was trying to get the certification in the legislation, because it was so new and there was such a lack of available legal advice on the subject.
And the other question I have for you is, in terms of the conversations having with your headquarters, the top board of directors, whatever, mm-hmm. What were those conversations like in terms of you saying, right, can we do this?
Well, one of the best things about working for Huhtamaki, and I mean, I think the paper straw example was a really good example of that. It was, albeit on a less risky scale, was that the paper straw conversation was I want to get out of making folded carton in Belfast and I want to start making something brand new. They trusted us and they trusted the Belfast team. I think that now that we had that paper straw example in the bag, the confidence level was exceptionally high and helped that initial conversation. Whenever I lifted the phone late one night to my boss in Helsinki and said I want to start making face shields, he was like, "What? Talk me through it." But within 20 minutes, it was right. Yeah, it sounds really good. Do you think you can do it? How much do we need to invest in it? Right, let's do it. And it was a half-hour conversation. Got the buy-in, and then it was just sort of regular updates on that. Now, to be honest with you, the Belfast team of the darlings of the group at the minute in terms of bringing innovation and providing growth during what has been a really, really difficult period for the company and food and drink packaging. So it's good, but there's a good level of confidence to start with, and that level of confidence now is even more.
Great. I've some questions for our legal representative from Tughans, seeing as you raised the issue of law there. One question I have myself is just around this difference between what it actually says in the regulations, which, if you like, is law, and then all the guidance which goes along with that. So, for example, some people have been saying to me, well, the 2 meter distancing rule is merely guidance; it's not law. So if I was to try and trade my business on the basis of 1 meter, would I be exposed to any legal liability if I did so?
Well, in answer to that, you're quite right, John. The regulations, that's the law, and there are myriad regulations, and they're extremely onerous for employers at the best of times. The guidance is guidance, and because we're in a very dynamic risk situation here for everyone, everyone's having to deal with the guidance and apply it on the ground as best they can. The 2 meter distancing, I think I mentioned in the course of the talk. The 2 meter distancing, yes, is currently the scientific advice that the government is relying on at the moment, with the discussion around whether or not it can safely be reduced to 1 meter. I think when we talk about risk assessments, that's obviously a requirement under the regulations and the law. What employers should do in those circumstances, or need to do in those circumstances where, for example, it's not possible to perform the particular process or procedures with adopting the 2 meters, they need to then enhance and review the protections around their employees in those circumstances. So, for example, they may have to consider, perspex partitions. We've heard about those throughout, or increase the PPE provision depending on the particular work process that they are assessing at that particular time. So I think it's important for all employers to know and understand that the regulations that were there pre-COVID are still there, and that is the law, and that is what they must adhere to. But obviously this is a very, very dynamic situation. Sometimes in dynamic situations there isn't a black or white answer. There's grey in between, and what I would say there is, when people are assessing risks post-COVID lockdown, that they document their thinking around that risk assessment, and their duty is really to take all reasonably practicable measures. That's the language in the legislation and statutes, to make sure that the health and safety of their employees is protected. So yes, it's very difficult. And it's very difficult on the ground in view of the dynamic situation we're all finding ourselves in, but that's still the legal requirement, is to assess those risks, and I would say document the thinking behind them as well.
And it's just a question related to that, which is, what are employers advised to do if, despite all the health and safety measures and the risk assessments, an employee says they still don't want to come to work because either they're worried or because they have to use public transport to get to work?
Yes, that's very, very, very difficult, and that's why I suppose, predicated the talk by saying it's about encouraging people back to work and encouraging them to believe that the employer's health and safety cultures and ethos is to make sure that they and by extension their families are going to be as safe as the employer can possibly make them. It is very difficult. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer here, and it depends very much on how the employer can approach that attitude that if I'm not happy as a person for my health and safety, I'm not going to come to work. And to be honest, that's as much an employment law issue as it is a health and safety issue, John.
Yeah. And then another question, probably more health and safety related. Is there any advice in relation to employees travelling to and from the workplace in the same vehicle where social distancing to a full extent obviously can't take place?
I know of certain circumstances where, for example, work vans are having to be deployed to get employees from A to B within their normal work environment. Whereas, you know, X number may well have fitted into a van previously. Maybe 2 vans have to be sent with the sufficient number of employees, one sitting in the front, one sitting in the back, to try and promote and ensure as much distancing as possible. And then we're back to that scenario where a 2 metre gap maybe can't be facilitated within those environments to enhance the protections available, whether that is face coverings or not, is something for the individual employer then to consider, that enhanced PPE. It's the lawyer coming out of me again, John, is to ensure that all of those are documented. Document trails are the holy grail for lawyers and courts ultimately. So I would say to all employers on the call to ensure that that's done, those measures are taken.
This is another question, just to go back to Ciaran, if I've interpreted this question correctly. Can you brand your Huhta masks? So I'm wondering, is that question about, can you make your masks for a company and put their branding on it effectively?
Well, the short answer is yes. Primarily, our strategy is we have huge ambitions for the product. You know, we don't want people just to buy a mask. We want people to buy a Huhta mask, and that is a registered trademark for us, and we fully intend to put the weight behind, you know, establishing that brand. But yes, we have the capability for large orders to bespoke branding on there for people, and that's something that we would have the ability to do. Yes. Actually,
yeah, because I know yesterday morning when I looked in my Gmail inbox, I had a couple of ads for masks, one from Adidas for the youth, and then Hilditch and Key, who make bespoke shirts. They were also saying they could get you one which is tailored in Italy. Just another question, back to Kathy. With regard to home workers, there's also a risk around an entire workforce working from home. So what obligations do employers have when it comes to providing staff with furniture and IT equipment to achieve that sort of safe working environment?
Well, the employer does have a duty to ensure that there is a safe working environment within the home environment as well, you know, to risk assess that environment, John, and make sure that insofar as it's reasonably practicable, which I keep going back to because that's the wording in the legislation, that the work station, if you like, at home is safe and is an appropriate environment for the particular employee. I mean, there's all sorts of considerations for home working. It's not an entirely new concept, but I think it's probably fair to say in Northern Ireland it's developing apace. So in terms not just of the physical environment for work, also the mental health environment is something that that employees and employers will be very keen to ensure is looked at appropriately. So employers will be keeping in touch with their people who are working from home, making sure there's that sort of connectivity between colleagues and at various stages within the management structure as well. And just that keeping in touch to ensure that that working environment and the overall welfare of the employee is looked after as much as that person is working from home as it would be had they been working, for example, in an office environment, as I have done my whole life. So yeah, so it's not just about the physical health and safety of the individual, it's also about that welfare, and that's very much articulated in the statutory framework, and it is very important obviously for employers to be aware of that requirement as well within that framework.
And then an acute kind of difference being drawn here. Is there a difference then for home working and remote working? Does an employer have an obligation there from somebody who can work from anywhere, anytime, as opposed to from their home?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. I mean, the employer's duty is to look after their employee. I suppose, wherever they happen to be working for them, and to take those reasonably practical measures to ensure that the place and the environment that the employee is working in for the employer is as safe as is reasonably practicable. So I would say, in terms of remote working and home working, remote meaning away from your normal environment, whether that's an office environment or not, the same obligations would apply.
Okay, I just have a question for Tina, which is just around the engagement forum. Do we know what sort of future it has? Is this just like an ad hoc thing, or is it going to be something which the executive is due to continue with?
There's been a lot of, the executive are using it to sanity check a lot of the things that are going on right now. So even this discussion around 2 meters versus 1 meter, I think that we will see a change in GB very soon, and then the executive will have to consult, and probably with the engagement, you do have the unions and business groups working hand in glove, and that's not normal. So to get agreement, they've been getting agreement, so the executive are looking to use that to help them in the near future. How long that goes on for, I believe what goes on for.
I think we just about got the gist of that. The technology pretty much lasted all the way through to the end there. So thank you to all our presenters today, and thank you, Ciaran, particularly for that fascinating story about finding a way through this and doing something, I think, really positive with your business. So hopefully that gives us a bit of inspiration that I think we all need. This thing is not over yet. We are hopefully getting towards something like normality. There's going to be greater easing over the next couple of weeks. So hang in there. We'll do what we can. Thank you to Tughans for supporting this event today. Thank you to the IoD for putting it together. I hope you found it useful. And as we said, it was being recorded. So I'm assuming that if you want to get a copy of the recording, you can contact the IoD. Okay, so everybody have a good day, and bye-bye.